Welcome back to the Washington Examiner Live. I'm Christian Jaytok, joined by Tiana Lowe-Desher. We're going to be running down the entire Kamala Harris-Donald Trump debate. So let's just dive right into it, Tiana. Who do you think won tonight? Who do you think lost? Were goals accomplished that the two candidates had set out ahead of Tuesday evening?
If it were an expectation game, it definitely served Kamala Harris much better. She is a candidate that we know works much better scripted, and she was allowed to maintain it. You know, her whole fear that Donald Trump wouldn't be allowed to interrupt her, and then actually it turns out that she really wanted to interrupt and fact-check him. The main asset that she had was that the moderators were working directly in her favor. To their credit, back in June, to believe it was all that long ago, the CNN moderators that were moderating Donald Trump and Joe Biden did quite a good job digging into policy prescriptions and really following up on both of them. In this case, it was a pretty 3-against-1 debate. But again, Harris stuck to her script. We will remember, she continues to say, "You're running against me, not Joe Biden," reiterating all of the bits about abortion that she wanted to. It worked in her favor, and he did take the debate that was laid out not just by Harris, but also by the moderators.
I do want to double down on the moderators here in a little bit, but I think one thing that was interesting that I certainly noticed, and it seemed like people on Twitter caught on to this also, Harris's lines, her biggest applause lines, so to speak, on social media and coming from the campaign, these were all telegraphed softball traps that Donald Trump slipped into. When she's being asked about immigration, and then all of a sudden she pivots to an easy bait line about why people are leaving his rallies early because he's losing it and they're getting bored. Trump took that bait every single time, and I think it sort of flipped the script on what we saw back in that first debate with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Donald Trump, for all of his faults, appeared, totally with it. And, like a much younger man than Joe Biden did. I think that has changed this time around because Harris took a page out of the Trump playbook, bait your opponent, give him rope to hang himself, essentially. Let's talk about the moderators because David Muir fact-checked Donald Trump on at least 2 occasions by my account. One was the incident involving Springfield, Ohio, and claims that Haitian migrants are eating pets of local residents there. The other was a claim that Democrats want to allow abortion after a baby is born. They didn't fact-check Kamala Harris at all. Do you think ABC loses credibility with the way they handled this debate?
Of course they do, but are we not also siloed that you have people like Jen Rubin on Twitter saying, ABC demonstrated everything that CNN should have done, and Trump fans, ignoring his own faults during the debate by just blaming it on the moderators. 2 things can be equally true at once. One, it is entirely unfair for them to tee up all the questions, not just to favor Harris, but also allow her to lie with impunity. And also, Donald Trump should know better than to give them what they want from a purely political perspective. It would be much easier for him to, rather than obsess about himself, focus on the Biden-Harris record. Focus on the metrics that his campaign has been touting, right? Prices up 20%. Energy prices up more than 33%. Mortgage rates up to a 20-year high around the 8% mark. You have foreign explosions in Gaza, Russia. He only hinted at those. And there were easy layups there for him. Like when Harris fulminated over the idea that he would invite the Taliban to negotiate at Camp David, is that such an affront to have the Taliban for one weekend at Camp David to negotiate rather than handing the entire country of Afghanistan that we've spent trillions of dollars on to them for good?
That's an interesting question, and I think one that the media pundits will certainly be debating. The way this debate was handled is certainly going to be a hot topic tomorrow morning. I do want to take a step back because you mentioned the policy debate, which is something you and I think most of the voters out there really wanted to see for a number of reasons. The first and foremost, of course, is that Kamala Harris has not yet put out her full platform, and it's something she's now being knocked not only by Republicans, but also Democrats over, given the flip-flop she's had from some of her previous progressive positions. We started tonight on the economy. both candidates sort of outlined their plan for how they would handle the inflation that you just mentioned, the out-of-control housing market, and all of that. But then we left economy behind.
Yeah.
For I saw a stat, the first hour of the debate, there was only one question on the economy. Do you think the way this was handled will satisfy independent, undecided voters who are actually trying to make their vote based on what each candidate will install, either through executive actions or through pushing legislation in Congress?
Honestly, the best thing for Trump about the fact that this was not his best debate, we know the setting probably didn't suit him, he likes playing to a crowd, is the fact that they didn't cover what was important. How many voters are going to make their decisions based on January 6th? Horrible day, also 4 years ago. Not the inflation that we're dealing with right now. Not the women and girls that have been deprived the right to their educations, in Afghanistan right now. None of that was covered. And Harris wasn't challenged on any of her prior positions. We still know that Donald Trump, even after 2 months of unanimously flattering media coverage for Kamala Harris, he still has a double-digit lead when it comes specifically to the economy. In that latest New York Times Siena poll, she gets a little bit of a benefit when it comes to things like abortion, national unity. Pew Research shows that she still has an edge when it comes to the ability to talk about race relations. Trump has maintained those bread and butter issues, which is why it's such political malpractice that he didn't just bring it around back to that. He's correct that she did steal some of his ideas, right? She is trying to steal the no tax on tips. And whatever, if you want to borrow a good idea, that's fine, as long as you don't want to, as he says, reject putting on the MAGA hat. But the 180s were not properly addressed by the moderators. And to Trump's fault, he should have challenged her more on it. He should have pointed out that you once backed a federal jobs guarantee. But the moderators had no interest in that as well, and that is technically their job.
I want to move on to an abortion question in a second, but just based off that last point you're making, and I agree with Trump making all of these unforced errors essentially, at least from a gamesmanship strategy perspective, do you think the fact that he didn't hold formal debate preparation is something the campaign is kicking themselves over right now?
I think in this setting, absolutely, because it's much different if you're working in a normal debate where there's an audience, you have let's say a primary debate where you have multiple people around you. Working a room is much different than working a candidate you've never met before. Him and Hillary Clinton, by the time they were sparring off in 2016, they had been friends for decades.
Trump had supported her in the past.
Yeah, the Clintons had been to his wedding with Melania.
Exactly.
With Joe Biden, even though Biden and Trump weren't personal friends, they both had known each other in relation for also decades. They were both national known quantities. Harris and Trump never met. She became a senator while he was president. And she wasn't a particularly active senator in terms of lobbying the other side. They'd never worked in a room together. And he's someone that very much requires personal energy. You have that bit at the beginning that's going to be so overanalyzed, and it depends on who wins or who loses this election, that'll say who it's to their favor, that he doesn't go up to her. She goes up to him to go shake his hand. In my opinion, that came across as confidence on her end, but then it was less confident. She kept on making the weird smirks, the weird, hands to the face. She was really trying to gesticulate and throw him off his game. And he didn't take that bait. So visually, it was almost like a cross-section Nixon versus JFK, whereas if you were looking at it, he was very much the dominant figure. But listening to it, the rehearsal worked for her. David Muir and Lindsay Davis let her repeat her lines, and she was allowed to do it without any sort of fact-checking, and Trump took the bait.
I think one note on that's interesting, and I haven't tallied the official speaking times myself, but seeing on social media, people who were clocking it said Trump got 9 more minutes of speaking time than Harris did. It might have been a deliberate strategy from the moderators. It might have been Trump asking to respond to claims made by Harris, but I do think that ultimately ended up hurting him because of the way he approached this debate. Let's talk about abortion, because Democrats have basically pointed to this issue as their biggest winner heading into November. The campaign said that the abortion exchange itself, they saw 71% of their donors become female at that point in time. I think it was 937, somewhere around there. And they also said that their dial-in focus groups they were doing with battleground voters, that was her biggest lift from Trump on the night, something like a 40-point difference. How real is the abortion issue going to be come November?
You know, for 2 years in a row, the last two midterms, I've said inflation's so bad, and then the geopolitical conflagrations have been so bad that it's not going to be an issue. And 2 years in a row have been proven incorrectly, despite what the polling has said. Still, the economy reigns supreme, and especially when you see these job gains slowly diminishing, that's real. Immigration, the problem compounds. But abortion is a good issue for Democrats in terms of at least just dissuading that marginal, let's say, the Romney-Clinton voter from coming out. And what Trump has done successfully in the last month is try and illustrate the fact that he's actually the moderate on the issue, and Harris is the extreme candidate. And unfortunately, he did not do a great job cementing that position tonight. And in part, it was because of the moderators. For instance, there was probably his best moment from a debate perspective was when he tried to challenge Harris about her support for late-term abortion. She talks about codifying Roe v. Wade, which would legalize abortion federally through the point of viability, which is about halfway through a pregnancy. But Harris, both as a senator and as vice president, has endorsed the Women's Health Protection Act, which would legally codify abortion through the end of a pregnancy. The average American abortion position is strangely a little bit like Trump's. They don't want to make it illegal in those early terms, but the second you get to the second trimester, the majority of Americans do turn against it. And the moderators didn't push back on it, even though 70% of Americans oppose it. Instead, all they talked about was fact-checking Trump relitigating Terry McAuliffe or Ralph Northam's past discussions about, partial birth abortion bans, which have less to do with the national conversation. And he missed a very obvious opportunity, which was to say J.D. Vance was correct that he would veto any national restriction on abortion.
I did think that was a big mistake by Trump. Not only did he not embrace that position, but he said he hadn't spoken to Vance about that, which you have to imagine is a crack that Democrats in the Harris campaign will try to exploit come tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Donald Trump and J.D. Vance aren't talking. We're running out of time, so let's look forward to November. Do we think there's going to be another debate after this?
Oh, man, it was already a long shot before this, and quite frankly, the fact that the moderators were as, I hate to say this word, but biased as they were, and that Harris would not commit to doing a Fox News debate with the objective moderators, Martha McCallum, Brett Baier, two of the best in the business, I don't see why he would take the deal.
Flipping that question on its head, or your answer rather, it seems like we both agree that for whatever the reason, Harris walks out the clear winner tonight. What can Trump do to reverse what could be a serious slippery slope towards November? Harris had this big bump heading into the convention. They had sort of evened out and are neck and neck in the polls, trading separate battlegrounds. But I have to imagine the polls that come out later this week following the debate will probably show a pretty different picture.
Yes, but also, though, as we've seen, kitchen table issues still reign supreme. As long as the campaign continues to message about the crisis of Bidenomics, the Biden crisis along the southern border, it's one thing for her to say, you're not running against Joe Biden. But does the rest of the country agree with that? According to that latest New York Times Siena poll, the majority of the country views her as a continuation of the Biden regime. If the campaign maintains a discipline and Donald Trump doesn't melt down on Twitter and he lets them make the message of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I don't think this is a catastrophe. It's just the fact that it was a win in her favor, but it's a win with a very large asterisk.
I do think my final closing note to you guys at home is that, to echo what Tiana just said, we knew going into tonight Trump wanted to tie Harris to Biden, but he kind of contradicted himself. He said Biden hates her, he can't stand her, he pushed her out. So that's a little bit of a mixed message and something that he definitely needs to clean up moving forward. But that's all the time we have tonight. Thank you for joining us at home. I'm Christian Daytalk. She's Tiana Lowe-Desher. You can follow along with the rest of our debate coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.